Joined now by Associate Professor in Public Law at UCT, Richard Calland. Good evening, Richard. Thanks very much for joining us. It's so interesting that this is happening as we're hearing about Angelo Agrizzi's deteriorating health. You know, last week his lawyer said that he has so much more to say, and they have been very disappointed that he wasn't granted bail, that he hasn't been looked after properly. This is a whistleblower. And I think really what Thuli Madonsela is getting at is that we need to encourage people to come forward so we can catch the big fish. Maybe she's being really pragmatic. What do you think?
Well, it may be pragmatic, but, you know, there comes a point where pragmatism defeats principle to the point that it really empties the vessel, so to speak. And I think what's unfortunate about this idea is twofold. Firstly, legally, it seems to me it's insecure, and it's blurring the lines with what is often common practice in criminal justice systems, which is the offering of lower forms of prosecution. In other words, trading with the potential convict. That's commonplace, and I think that's already been used. It's already in place, and it's a very important lever that the prosecuting authorities have available to them. A blanket amnesty removes that because it essentially says if you come forward, you will get amnesty if you satisfy the conditions. I'm not clear what those conditions are in any case. I think your reference to Agrizzi is interesting, but he, of course, is a much bigger fish. And I imagine there was some plea bargaining on his side. It may well be that he will face lesser charges than had he not been cooperative. I'm sure he is being cooperative, has been cooperative. I don't really see him as a whistleblower. A whistleblower is someone who really comes forward much earlier in the process and tries to stem the flow of corruption and says, look, there's wrongdoing around me. Please come and help. Let's get this sorted before it gets out of control. State capture ran out of control, Sally, of course. And what we need as a country is accountability.
All right, so Richard, the line with you is looking a little dodgy. I'm going to try and we'll see if we can keep the line going. The obvious comparison, of course, is that we granted amnesty to apartheid perpetrators who confessed all. And the condition there was, you tell us everything and you might get amnesty. But the otherwise is also true. You don't tell us everything, we could then come after you. Couldn't that work for corruption? And I'll tell you why. The practical thing is a big issue. We have a hollowed-out prosecuting authority. If the threat remained that you would still get prosecuted if you didn't confess all and we caught you, wouldn't that be a good enough incentive?
It could be in some cases, but what I just heard Advocate Madonsela say in the sound clip you played was something rather different from that. She described really very, very low-ranking officials who, according to her version, have been kind of pushed into doing this, bullied into making small procurement malpractices, that kind of thing. They may even have a defence available to them. If they're really that small a cog in the big wheel, it's entirely possible that a prosecution service might say, well, actually, we're not going to bring charges against you. We've caught you, we've found out, you've been forthcoming, you've shared information. That's enough. Clearly, the whole system must be geared towards getting the kingpins, as Madonsela puts it. And I agree with her there. Where, of course, I'm differing is whether the blanket amnesty idea, you mentioned the TRC, that was a very, very different situation. Mandela was trying to create the circumstances for national reconciliation. There was a very strong public policy ground for bringing it. Though, of course, later, amnesty was much criticised because it was said there was too much amnesty and not enough justice. And we may well get the same refrain in this case if there is amnesty granted to people who were cogs, however small, in the state capture wheel.
Would you say absolutely no to any form of amnesty over corruption, or do you think with certain conditions it might be quite a useful tool?
Well, if it was the case that the prosecuting authority was saying to the government and to the public, look, we just can't cope. We don't have the capacity. We're not getting where we need to quickly enough. And we need to find another mechanism to get the evidence out. Then, yes, of course, one would have an open mind. One would look afresh at the idea. But unless that is the case and they have, under the radar, asked Advocate Madonsela to raise this idea, to test the water, I have no evidence that is the case, then I don't see the basis for it. As far as I'm concerned, what we've seen in recent times, in fact, is the reverse. We've seen the prosecuting authorities making real headway in bringing people to justice. We've seen significant arrests in the last few weeks and a real sense of momentum And I fear that this idea will muddy the water and perhaps undermine efforts to bring people to justice, however big or small they were in state corruption.
Thank you very much for your views this evening. Associate Professor in Public Law at UCT, Richard Calland. Still ahead.